Hey there, everyone. I don't usually talk about this night. It's one of those memories that lingers in the back of your mind, a place where logic can't quite make sense of what happened. But here we are. It was a quiet Sunday night, sometime in November. I had just finished visiting my parents in a small town about 3 hours from where I lived. The highway stretched out before me, long and dark, with only the hum of my car and the occasional flicker of a passing streetlight to keep me company. I had made this trip dozens of times before, but this night was different. About an hour into the drive, I saw him. He was standing by the side of the road, his thumb sticking out in that universal hitchhiker gesture. Normally, I wouldn't even think about stopping, especially at night. But something about him made me slow down. He wasn't your typical hitchhiker. He wore a clean white button-up shirt and dark slacks, like he'd just come from a formal event. His face was pale with sharp features that almost seemed too perfect. And his eyes, those dark, piercing eyes, locked onto mine as I pulled up beside him. I rolled down the window just enough to speak. "Where are you headed?" He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, not quite. It was more like a knowing one. "Just down the road," he said, his voice calm and smooth. "I'd appreciate the lift." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door. He climbed in without a word, settling into the seat like he belonged there. The car felt colder with him inside. I remember thinking it was strange. I had the heater on, but the chill seemed to seep into my bones. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to nerves. We drove in silence for a while. He didn't fidget, didn't adjust the seat, didn't even look out the window. He just sat there, staring straight ahead. Finally, I broke the silence. "So, where exactly are you going?" He turned his head slowly, that same eerie smile still on his face. "Just a little further. You'll know when we get there." That answer didn't sit well with me, but I didn't press. Something about him made me feel like I shouldn't ask too many questions. As we drove, I started to notice things that didn't make sense. The highway seemed longer. I'd driven this route enough times to know where every curve and exit was, but the landmarks were all wrong. The gas station I usually passed was missing, replaced by a long stretch of trees. The mile markers were out of order, skipping from 32 to 45, and then back to 29. And then there were the headlights. At first, I thought it was just another car in the distance coming toward us. But as the lights got closer, I realized they weren't behaving like normal headlights. They weaved erratically, darting from one side of the road to the other, faster than any car could possibly move. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. The hitchhiker was still there, calm as ever. But his reflection wasn't right. In the mirror, his face looked distorted, like it was being stretched in impossible directions. His eyes were black pits, his mouth twisted into a grotesque grin that didn't match the expression on his actual face. I looked away, my heart racing. What's going on here?" I stammered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "You should keep driving," he said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. The headlights were nearly on top of us, but there was no car. Just the lights, blindingly bright, hurtling straight toward us. I braced for impact, but they passed right through the car, flooding the interior with an intense, otherworldly glow. When the light faded, the road was different. The pavement was cracked and uneven. The lines faded to the point of being nearly invisible. The trees that lined the highway were gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. "I think I should turn around," I said, my voice shaking. The hitchhiker's smile widened, his teeth unnaturally white in the dim light. "It's too late for that." I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt. "Get out," I demanded, my hands trembling on the wheel. He didn't move. I said, "Get out." His head tilted to the side, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't your road anymore." Panic set in. I threw the car into reverse, the tires screeching as I tried to back away. But no matter how far I drove, the road ahead remained the same. It was like I was trapped in some twisted loop, unable to escape. And then he started laughing. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was low and guttural, echoing in the car like it was coming from all around me. His form began to shift, his features melting and reforming into something that wasn't human. His eyes glowed like embers, and his hands, now clawed and skeletal, gripped the edge of the seat. "You can't leave," he said, his voice distorted and echoing. "Not until you've given me what I want." I didn't stick around to find out what that was. I flung the door open and bolted, leaving the car and whatever he had become behind. The last thing I remember is running into the woods, the sound of his laughter following me until I finally blacked out. I woke up the next morning on the side of the highway, my car nowhere in sight. To this day, I have no idea how I got there or what happened to the hitchhiker, but I've never driven that stretch of road again. Hey everyone, I need to share something that still gives me chills every time I think about it. This happened a few years ago, and to this day I can't fully explain it. It's the kind of story that makes you question reality, something you don't forget, no matter how much you want to. So I was driving home from visiting my parents in another state. It was late, probably around 11 p.m., and I was on this long stretch of highway. The kind where the exits are miles apart, and the only thing lighting the road is your car's headlights and the occasional flicker of a far-off streetlight. The drive started normal enough. Just me, a coffee in the cup holder, and some music to keep me company. But as I got further into the night, I noticed something strange. The highway, which had been pretty busy earlier, was suddenly empty, like no cars in either direction. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe I was in a quiet stretch, or everyone else had taken a different route. But then I started noticing the signs. The first one said, "Exit 42, Smith Grove." Nothing weird about that, right? Except, I'd been on this route dozens of times before, and I'd never seen an exit called Smith Grove. I figured maybe I just never paid attention, but the name stuck out to me because I couldn't recall ever seeing it on the map. I kept driving, and a few miles later, there it was again. Exit 42, Smith Grove. Same exit, same name. But I hadn't seen the actual ramp, no turn-off, no overpass, just the sign. Now I was getting uneasy. I glanced at my GPS, but it wasn't showing any Smith Grove. In fact, the screen was frozen, stuck on a stretch of highway that didn't seem to match where I was. No signal, no updates, just this static map that wasn't helping at all. I shook it off, telling myself it was probably just a glitch. Maybe I was tired and imagining things. But then, I saw the sign again. Exit 42, Smith Grove. This time I slowed down, looking carefully for the turnoff. And there it was. A narrow ramp that curved sharply to the right, lit by a single flickering light. I had this sinking feeling in my stomach, but curiosity got the better of me. I figured if nothing else, I could stop and stretch my legs. Big mistake. I took the ramp, and immediately it felt wrong. The pavement was cracked and uneven, like it hadn't been maintained in decades. The light that I'd seen from the highway wasn't flickering anymore. It was completely out, and the further I drove, the darker it got. My headlights barely seemed to cut through the blackness ahead of me. After about a minute, I came to a stop. The road just ended. There was no sign, no barrier, just a wall of dense trees in front of me. My heart was racing at this point, but I figured maybe I'd missed a turn or something. I put the car in reverse to back up, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, The ramp I'd just come down was gone. It wasn't there, just more trees. I was officially freaked out now. My mind was racing with every horror story I'd ever heard. Was this some kind of trap? Was someone out there waiting for me? I locked my doors and tried to stay calm, telling myself there had to be an explanation. That's when I saw it. In the trees just beyond the reach of my headlights, there was movement. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I realized it was something taller, human-shaped. But it wasn't moving like a person. It was jerky, almost like it was glitching out of reality. I honked the horn, trying to scare it off, but it didn't flinch. Instead, it stepped closer, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of its face, or what should have been a face. It was blank. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin stretched over its skull. And it was smiling. Not with a mouth. There was no mouth. But somehow, I knew it was smiling at me. I panicked, slamming the car into drive and jerking the wheel to turn around. My tires skidded on the cracked pavement, and for a split second I thought I was stuck. But then the car jolted forward and I sped off into the darkness. Except, the road didn't lead back to the highway. It just kept going, twisting and turning like some kind of labyrinth. The trees seemed closer now, almost like they were leaning in toward the car. And that thing, it was still there. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, keeping pace with me just out of sight. After what felt like an eternity, I saw another sign. Exit 42, Smith Grove. I floored it, not caring where the ramp led as long as it got me away from that place. The car shot forward, and suddenly I was back on the highway, just like that. One moment I was surrounded by darkness, and the next I was back on the main road, the glow of streetlights ahead of me. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station about 20 miles down the road. I stumbled inside, shaking, and asked the clerk if he'd ever heard of Smith Grove. He gave me a weird look and said, "Smith Grove? That exit's been closed for years. It doesn't go anywhere." I don't know what I saw that night or what would have happened if I'd stayed longer. But I do know this. I've avoided exit 42 ever since. Hey everyone, this is a story I've been hesitant to share, but it's something that stuck with me for years. Every time I think back on it, it sends chills down my spine. It's one of those moments where you know something is wrong, but you can't explain why. It all happened a few summers ago. I was driving late at night, heading back from a weekend trip with some friends. It was a long, straight stretch of highway, the kind that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. The air was thick and still, and the moon barely peeked out from behind a layer of clouds. The drive was uneventful at first. Just me, the hum of the engine, and a playlist I'd thrown together to keep me awake. I'd passed a couple of semis here and there, but for the most part, the road was eerily quiet. About 2 hours into the trip, things started to feel off. It was subtle at first, like the temperature in the car dropped a few degrees, even though the AC wasn't blasting. Then I noticed the highway signs. They were blank. I mean, completely empty. No exit numbers, no town names, just these metal frames with reflective green backgrounds. At first, I thought maybe I'd just zoned out and missed the text. Long drives do that to you, you know? But as I kept going, every sign I passed was the same. Blank. Then it happened. I glanced at the rearview mirror just out of habit, and I saw her. A woman sitting in the back seat. My heart stopped. I slammed on the brakes so hard that the car skidded to a stop in the middle of the highway. I whipped around, ready to confront whoever had somehow snuck into my car. But there was no one there. The back seat was empty. I sat there for a minute, my pulse racing, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a trick of the light or my mind playing games with me. But the thing is, I'd seen her, clear as day. She was wearing this pale blue dress, her hair long and dark, hanging over her face like something out of a nightmare. I told myself to get it together. I mean, what was I going to do? Sit there all night? So I started driving again, a little faster this time, just wanting to get off that stretch of road as soon as possible. But the farther I drove, the weirder things got. First, the radio cut out. 1 second it was playing some upbeat pop song, and the next, static. I tried switching stations, but all I got was this weird, low humming sound. It wasn't like regular static. It felt alive, like it was pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Then the headlights of my car dimmed, and for a few seconds it was like the darkness outside was swallowing me whole. I could barely see the road in front of me, just the faint glow of the pavement. And then I saw her again. This time she was standing on the side of the road, staring at me as I passed. Her head was tilted at this unnatural angle, like she was trying to decide whether or not to step in front of the car. I sped up, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My gut was screaming at me to get away, but no matter how fast I went, she kept appearing. First on the left side of the road, then the right, then directly in the rearview mirror. I tried telling myself it wasn't real, that I was tired or maybe hallucinating, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. She was there, and she wasn't alone. About 10 miles down the road, I started to notice shadows in the trees, figures moving just beyond the tree line, keeping pace with my car. They didn't have faces, just these hollow black voids where eyes and mouths should have been. And then the whispers started. I couldn't make out the words, but they filled the car like a crowd of people murmuring all at once. It was deafening, and no matter how loud I turned up the radio, or what was left of it, the whispers drowned everything out. I was losing it. I could feel the panic bubbling up in my chest, my breathing coming in short, shallow gasps. All I wanted was to find an exit, any exit, and get the hell off that highway. Finally, I saw a sign, or at least, I thought I did. It was up ahead, glowing faintly in the darkness. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't like any highway sign I'd ever seen. It didn't have words or numbers, just this strange, jagged symbol etched into the metal. And standing beneath it, in the middle of the road, was her. She was closer now, close enough that I could see her eyes, or where her eyes should have been. They were empty sockets, oozing this dark, tar-like liquid that dripped onto the pavement. Her mouth was open, wider than any human mouth should be, and I swear I could hear her laughing. I swerved, narrowly missing her, and shot past the sign. The road ahead seemed to stretch forever, like I was driving in some kind of endless loop. And then, just like that, it was over. I don't remember how I got home. One moment I was on that cursed stretch of highway, and the next, I was pulling into my driveway, the sun just starting to rise. The car was covered in dirt, like I'd been driving through a storm. And in the back seat, lying on the floor, was a single blue ribbon. I don't know who or what that woman was, but I've avoided that highway ever since.